We are live with this new format called The Dictators, and I'm joined here by my friend and co-host David Debatter. We thought it was timely to introduce such a format given the authoritarian slide that's taking place. And let's face it, the slide of the US seems precipitously fast. Before we sort of jump into this new format, I'm going to ask my friend David here to introduce himself, say a bit about his background, and of course, his channel as well. We're going to sort of flash up his details onto the screen. But I think it's important, you know, the background and the fantastic project he's been running, because he is perhaps one of the few people who saw what we're seeing, the authoritarian slide in the US. He predicted pretty much all of this stuff. Many people thought he was mad and delusional, but he's been predicting this stuff for a good while now, a couple of years now. And I think we better pay attention to it. David, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Yeah, excuse me. You and I go back now, I think about 5 years. And at that time, it was nowhere near like it is today. I mean, it's just incredible. So, yeah, I got a lot of comments back when Trump was in his first term. And I said that a lot of the comments, and this was the early stages of MAGA, were very delusional. They really were off the charts. They made no sense whatsoever. And so I was encouraged to start a YouTube channel around that term. So the new, my channel, the No Delusion Zone, was born. So for those of you who would like to hear what I have to say, some of it's very uncomfortable, I'm sure, go to YouTube and go to No Delusion Zone. That's me. And you will hear many things that you don't hear on a lot of other channels about MAGA, Donald Trump, and I do, of course, speak about Ukraine, the war, Russia, and so forth and so on. But right now in the States, we are at an inflection point, Jonathan, and I think you know this. We're about, well, enough of that. We'll get into that during that. My prior background, as you asked, I am a retired counterintelligence agent with the U.S. Army. And since then, I've been writing, speaking, and recently, the last few years, become a podcaster. So that's the long and the short of it.
And interesting question for one of my friends today. I was sort of sharing some of the insights that we've been talking about, and his immediate reaction was, oh, well, I guess you're just talking to Democrats then. And this is part of the problem, isn't it? Because you're not a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. You're not a MAGA conservative. But it seems that almost everything is seen through this highly partisan lens. It's as if people cannot see the reality in front of them.
Yeah, well, that's what originally pissed me off about MAGA, meaning the supporters, the diehard supporters of Donald Trump, which is if you say anything critical of the Republican Party in the United States or Donald Trump, you're automatically listed as a Democrat, as a woke liberal. And I'm get really tired of saying that I'm not a Democrat. In fact, I hate all political parties. I'm a flaming independent. I don't believe in political parties. In many respects, the Democrats in the United States are just as bad as the Republicans. Overall, no, they're not. They're a bunch of weak-skinned lily livers who don't do enough or stand up for themselves. But they do have their problems. However, the Republican Party in the United States, which is now MAGA, are all members of a cult. Sorry, they are. But yeah, it still pisses me off that just because I might disagree with the Republicans, with Donald Trump, I'm automatically labeled as a weak-kneed liberal Democrat woke member. And that's just, excuse me, that's bullshit. And people who say that kind of make me sick. Other than that, here's my new cup about Donald Trump. If anybody wants to order it, I think that would be great. Basically, it says, Donald Trump, new dictator, same old shit.
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing, isn't it? Because I was looking at the Russian playbook in places like Georgia, its attempts to try and hack democracy in Moldova and other places. Viktor Orban's Hungary is a sort of great case in point. They don't all take on board the entire toolkit, but there is an authoritarian toolkit. There is a methodology, a loosely sort of set of processes and stances and narratives that will allow a democracy to be corrupted and ultimately for it to be co-opted, hollowed out, and turned into a zombie shadow of itself. So you may still call it a democracy in name, but everything that made it a democracy has been sort of scooped out like a sort of, hollow pumpkin at Halloween. That seems to be what's happening in the US, and yet so many people are still not seeing it.
Yeah, well, it's what you're describing is illiberal democracy. That's exactly what happens with Viktor Orban's Hungary. It may be happening in Slovakia with Robert Fico. There was just an election in the Czech Republic where a MAGA kind of a clone, a friend of Trump, won the election for prime minister. But here in the United States, that's exactly what's happening. They are weaponizing the tools of democracy. Meaning taking over the judiciary, so they only make friendly decisions, threatening and taking over the media, and they have pretty much all bowed to Donald Trump. They've paid him millions, in some cases billions of dollars in fees, so he doesn't take away their license or take away their federal funding. You take over the military then, and we are to the point as we speak right now, Jonathan, where the MAGA, the Republican Party under Donald Trump, is attempting to coerce the United States military into siding with him, becoming for the first time in American history not an apolitical organization aligned with no party. He wants them to be his private army, to do as he says, even to carry out illegal, unconstitutional orders, such as deploying the active duty military to American cities, to put down non-existent riots, non-existent insurrections, non-existent national security issues. That's blatantly illegal, whether or not the folks reading this want to believe it or not, or hearing this, but it is. We are within hours. Think about this. I'm telling you, we are within hours, possibly days, of Donald Trump enacting the Insurrection Act, which would allow him to put active duty United States military troops on the streets of America. He will be declaring martial law. As far as I'm concerned, I just did a podcast about this with Ben Hodges, as you know very well. And in my opinion, when that happens, we're dead. Our constitutional republic is gone. Our democracy, for all intents and purposes, is gone. And I would like to hear from anybody watching this who's writing right now in the comments, why, if Donald Trump enacts the Insurrection Act for a non-existent national emergency, our democracy is not gone. Tell me why they support that, if anyone listening to this does.
I think that's a really interesting question. And some of the things that have sort of shocked me, I wanted to run them past you. I mean, of course, there's the footage of ICE agents who seem to have a massive budget, but it's as if they've dragged people off the street who are not perhaps appropriate for those roles, give them almost no training, no safety guardrails whatsoever. They're throwing them on the streets. And what you're seeing is it reminds me of Georgia and the kind of titushki, which is the informal sort of forces that go and beat up opposition. So at the moment they're targeting just random people in the street, anyone who gets in their way, anyone who looks slightly off-white, this kind of stuff. But the next step surely is for them to start dragging out opposition under bogus charges. We see Miller already hinting that this is the next step. Not even hinting, he's telling you to our faces that this is what it's going to be. He used this phrase, didn't he? I can't remember what it is, but it implies absolute power to do anything. Plenary authority, I think that was it, which basically means unlimited authority, which is not what you have in a democratic republic or any democratic system. There's no such concept of unlimited power without checks and balances, without it being potentially, subject to the judicial review decisions made by the executive. So this is a kind of nonsense. You have ICE. You have this extraordinary agency that's appeared as if, relatively recently, with this hugely inflated budget. But you now have another step, which really takes me aback, and it makes me think that what seemed to be an incredibly strong structure in the US, which is that you have different states, and essentially it's as if you have your own sort of, president or prime minister. You have governors in each state. They have an extraordinary power. The governor of California, he governs a territory that's larger than most other countries in the world in terms of their GDP. So they have extraordinary power and responsibility. But now you're seeing the Republican states, some of them showing their absolute willingness to send their National Guard without permission, without any due, legal process into the territories of other governors. That looks to me like an invasion.
Oh, there's so many things I can say in so little time. For one thing, I just want to reply. I'm going to reply to your question in just a moment. I'm just glancing at some of the comments, and one of the biggest problems, Jonathan, is that the people who claim to be Republicans now, who vote Republican and support Trump, or at least vote Republican, and I'm reading the comments, that I don't have any credibility because I think that the GOP is MAGA. Well, why don't you read or get your news from anywhere but Fox News? The Republican Party is in lockstep with Donald Trump. What have they refused him? I'm talking the elected Republican officials. You who are writing these comments may not like Donald Trump and be a registered Republican. Are you the Republican Party? Of course not. You have no credibility yourself. The Republicans are a cult. They are in lockstep with Donald Trump. They haven't done anything to stop him in his seizure of power. Nothing. So I'll say it again. If it makes you angry, that's great. The Republicans are MAGA. Let them prove that they're not. Stand up to Donald Trump. Did you see the testimony of Pam Bondi yesterday, our Attorney General? It's disgusting. She's MAGA and she's Republican. If you think that's not MAGA, well, you're wearing blinders. Let's get to your question or your comments. You know, the Civil War was allegedly fought by the South to protect states' rights. Okay. Many outside the United States may not know that unless they study U.S. history. It was to protect the states against a strong federal government. I won't get into what I believe, of course, is the real reason for the Civil War, which is slavery, but I won't say that. But now, those who defend the South, those who defend MAGA, which is aligned with the southern states' way of thinking, now they want a strong federal government. They want states like Texas and Tennessee and some of the other states to send their National Guard into liberal states in order to protect, I don't know what, to protect the Department of Homeland Security from their own people. So it's okay if under Donald Trump, the federal government rides roughshod and tramples on the rights of other states, as long as it's not done by a Democratic president. That is such hypocrisy. But, you know, the Republican Party, which is MAGA, is hypocrisy today. It just makes me sick. It really, really does. And this is not. This is only the beginning of it. When the red states that are controlled by Republican governors are just jumping all over themselves for the chance to send their National Guard to states like Illinois or California, this is not a good thing. This is a bad thing.
And it seems that part of the play here is to create a provocation that would then justify a further crackdown. At the moment, it seems that there's an extraordinary amount of restraint. We see crowds of angry people, quite rightly. They're angry because random people are being snatched off the streets, beaten with no due process. People's homes are being raided. Their cars are being smashed into with no actual warrants or due process taking place. I've always thought of the US as a society drenched with lawyers, and you know it has always been a sort of criticism that the Brits have had, that it's too litigious. What I find shocking at this time is that, given that perception of a society that where everything has to be managed by reference to constitution, to law, and where you have so many lawyers, how can such a scale of illegality be taking place? And yet all this sort of due process, all this constitution, all this, you know, layer upon layer of legal authority and recourse to law seems to be having no effect. What on earth is going on there?
Two things: cowardice. Nobody ever said that all the lawyers were brave. In fact, I've never had any good feelings about most lawyers most of my life. They are now proving to be cowards, including the richest, most allegedly powerful law firms in the United States. were targeted by Donald Trump specifically, and they gave in immediately. They've paid him, I think in one case, at least $1 billion, and have agreed to do pro bono work for anything he wants. And these are the strongest law firms. They could have stood up to him by themselves, but if they had banded together with other strong, prestigious law firms, they could have told Donald Trump to take a hike, but they didn't because they're just afraid. It's cowardice. And let me answer that in another way too, Jonathan. You're saying what happened? You know, it's becoming very clear that although we have a fantastic constitution, we do, and our democracy's held for 249 years so far, it was always a fragile document. We were just very, very lucky that we had very fine, extraordinary elected officials for those 249 years to obey the Constitution, to obey the guardrails and not challenge it like it's being challenged now. Look, it's just a piece of paper. You know, if you say that I'm not going to agree or I'm not going to obey those guardrails, I'm not going to obey the amendments or any of the constitutional provisions or protections like due process, who's going to stop you? Well, the courts should. Well, if you own the courts by threatening the courts or packing the courts with your apparatchiks, your sycophants, then the courts aren't going to stop you either. If you replace the heads of the law enforcement agencies like the FBI and the Department of Justice with your lapdogs too, with MAGA, they're not going to arrest anybody who doesn't obey the Constitution. And now we're down to the last barrier against total dictatorship, the military. And again, for people who are watching this and writing about, I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, no, you don't know what you're talking about because apparently you don't watch American TV or read anything in America. Donald Trump is now actively recruiting the U.S. military to become his private army. He's been at Fort Bragg. He's been on naval bases in the last few days, telling them point blank that the Democrats are demons. They are the enemy within, and he needs them, the military, to do his bidding, to go fight for him, to fight for America on the streets of America. You don't think that's against the law? You don't think that's inciting a civil war, Americans against Americans? You don't think that's what dictators do? Well, then you're an idiot. Excuse me, you're a moron. That's why Jonathan has me on here. I speak pretty plain. I don't have any time for people who don't realize we're within hours or days of losing our constitutional republic. And I'm pissed, obviously.
And for those who are saying
it doesn't mean drunk. Pissed in England means drunk. I'm
angry.
It does. I am not pissed right now. I can be, but I'm angry.
And for those who are saying, like, hang on a second, this is crazy talk. We had conversations last year and even the year before describing what the steps of Project 2025 would look like. The different stages and exactly what would happen, including the coercion of the media, etc. And to be honest, you know, you laid that all out. So if people say you don't know what you're talking about, well, to my mind, you've already proven to me at least that what you're saying has predictive power. The trouble is, there's two things that have happened. This is all happening faster than I think either of us thought it would, because we assumed that the guardrails were stronger. We assumed that the checks and balances were stronger. We assumed that the institutions weren't as hollowed out as they were, and that people would resist in a far more energetic fashion. The way this is crumbling like a wet cake is shocking. Now, I expected Russia to crumble in this way because it had just a couple of years of so-called semi-independence, or let's say semi-leniency, when the state was weak and it started to develop, you know, nascent institutions and a nascent free press. It only had, you know, less than 10 years of that practice. So perhaps it's less surprising that that was swept away with relatively little, you know, resistance. But 250 years of these checks and balances being built up, this culture of democracy, and I'm not seeing a huge amount of resistance. In fact, I'm seeing extraordinary normalization on the part of many of the Democrats. So we're still discussing, you know, the detailed tenets of Obamacare, for goodness sake, rather than, you know, what we're seeing unfold. There are a few exceptions, Pritzker and Governor Newsom, I think, if I got that correctly.
Yes.
And there are a couple of amazing voices on the Republican side, the traditional GOP side, such as Denver Riggleman and a few others who've been on the channel. Extraordinary voices of courage and clarity. But they themselves, again, to the point of that's made in the comments, they themselves almost don't consider themselves Republicans anymore. Their party has moved to a place that they don't recognize. This is happening faster and with greater ease than I think either of us feared.
Yeah, I mean, and we've talked about this now for years. I thought it would happen very fast, but I will admit that it's happening even faster than I thought. What's the old, not the old saying, but the fact that's going around that it took Hitler 53 days to overthrow the Weimar Republic, or the now I'm forgetting it, to overthrow the German Constitution and make Germany into a dictatorship. 53 days. Donald Trump didn't make this into a dictatorship in 53 days, but he did so much damage in the first few weeks that it's hard to say who was faster. And I'm not comparing him to Hitler. I'm just saying that one man overthrew what was at the time, 1933, a constitutional republic. They had a German constitution. He did away with it in 53 days. Donald Trump and Project 2025 are doing their damnedest best to do the same thing here. And I'd like to ask anybody, aside from the Russian trolls or the bots that are writing in right now, the real people, if they don't think that Donald Trump is trying to become a dictator or make this into an authoritarian nation, then what exactly do they think dictators do? What do they look like? They don't all have horns or, look like a monster. They don't all look like Stalin and Hitler. They look like anybody. And tell me what Donald Trump is doing and the Republican Party, MAGA, is doing that you would say is unlike what dictatorships do. And if you say you don't know, well, then you shouldn't be commenting, because then you don't know. We are becoming a dictatorship, an authoritarian dictatorship.
And of course, not every dictatorship is full-on Stalinism. I think a lot of people's templates for what a dictatorship is, they'll look at that and go, well, we're not at that point. That's an, but that was an extraordinarily paranoid and large-scale, I would say, assault, almost a civil war during the Great Terror, where Stalin liquidated his people en masse. Many dictatorships are far more surgical, and I would say far more rational, and that includes Putin. Putin doesn't go around imprisoning all of his citizens day in, day out for no reason. He imprisons and kills the ones that oppose him, ones that threaten his business model, threaten his power, threaten his business interest. It is pretty surgical and economical. Even at this point, most of the people going to the front are either minorities from the cities that no one's really going to stand up for, LGBT, people of alternative lifestyles. Can't get the acronym out today, but mainly people of ethnicities outside the big cities. He goes after the weak and the vulnerable that no one is going to come to defend, and he uses them as material. Those who threaten his regime, who are, let's say, have sort of serious money or control, they quietly fall out of windows or whatever. But he's not going around, massacring the population en masse, because that's entirely irrational, and he's not.
I want to
mad.
follow up what you're saying, Jonathan, because you are so correct, as you usually are. That's what's going on here. Donald Trump's not picking on the billionaires. He's not going after the tech bros. He's going after the people that many Americans don't like. And those are brown-skinned people. Let me just say for the record, because they've already said it, you're trolls, and they will say it. I'm not for illegal immigration. In fact, I am for far harsher immigration laws. I am actually not opposed to sealing the border against all that are illegal, that are not here legally. I've said this my whole life, my adult life. This is nothing new. But like anything else, Jonathan, there's ways to do things and there's ways not to do things. You don't brutalize people just to carry out the law, to enforce the law. You don't torture them. You don't separate families. You don't throw them into cells and cages like animals. You don't build,
or rip a baby out of the arms of a mother. I saw that last week. There's a
zip tie the entire family in Chicago, little children. In the middle of the night, zip tie them with their hands behind their back and put them face down in the street, while a SWAT team went into the entire building in the middle of the night to find they didn't know who. They didn't have any warrants. They just were told, go in that building and do that. Due process. I'm sorry. I don't care who you are, if you're here legally or not. Due process, which means you have to know what the charges are and you've got to have your day in court. You can't be just disappeared like Stalin did. That's dictatorships.
And of course, there are people who are going to carry on living their lives. They're going to keep their heads down. They're going to make money. They might live in nice suburbs or nice places where, they could pretend this stuff isn't really going on. Or if they're aware that it's going on, they can convince themselves, well, you know what? The state must have a reason. These kind of random acts of, it's brutal to watch, but the people who run the country must have a reason. I'm sorry, that's what Russians say under Putin. He must have a reason. He must have a reason for invading Ukraine. He must have a reason for causing 1 million, and it's going to be by the end of next year, 2 million or more if it carries on. He must have a reason for sending, our people into the meat grinder. He must have a reason for this, that, and the other. What I realized from history is that dictators make stupid decisions because ultimately there's no one there to hold them to account. Ultimately, they give up listening to any voices of caution, and there's no checks and balances on them. So the scale of stupid decisions escalates with absolutely no way to hold it to account and prevent it from happening. And I think that's the most worrying thing. Dictatorship isn't just about, a Stalinist type regime or thing, because of Pink Floyd. It's not all about, Nazis marching in the street. It's about a leader having absolute impunity to do dumb shit day in, day out, and no one holding them to account.
Two things. And again, I'm following up on what you're saying because it rings so true. If you walk down the streets of most American towns, even big cities, small towns, big cities, rural areas, life is normal. It really is. I travel a little bit around, and you can go to pretty much any city, any town, any location, north, south, east, west, and you're not going to see jackbooted troops marching down the street. You're not going to find DHS or the Border Patrol, kidnapping somebody off the street. It's America. It's normal. But like you said, that's the way that some dictatorships start. It's not all at once. It took how many years? Many years in Russia for Putin to do this. And that's what we're looking at here. Look, also, how could anybody who supports Trump, including some of them that are writing in here today, not say that the Supreme Court giving the President of the United States absolute immunity for anything he does in office, criminal or civil, doesn't smack of a dictatorship? What the hell do they call a dictator then, or a king, or a queen, or a dictator of any kind, if they can't be held accountable for anything they do in office? Is that what you consider to be a democracy? Whoever disagrees with me, then I would say that you're pretty misguided if you don't think that's a major problem in a democracy.
And I want to address one of these other comments, someone who's really going off on one here. He says, is it a coincidence that all these raids are happening? I mean, irrespective of just how brutal and lacking in process they are, he says, is it coincidental that they're happening in areas of high immigration? Well, I think if we look at the statistics behind them, what's actually happening is that these are targeting areas of your political opponents, because there are areas of high immigration in Republican-controlled states and wards which are not being targeted, that are not having SWAT teams sent in. So if this was, a process designed for a particular outcome, then you could make that case. But actually, it clearly is I would say it's the foundations of a kind of brown shirt type movement. Well, they literally are brown shirt because they're in fatigues. It's the creation of a private army for Donald Trump's personal deployment and use.
Which is exactly what I've been saying. He's recruiting the U.S. military right now on a daily basis to become his private army, to disobey their oath to the U.S. Constitution and take an oath to him. Look, all these deployments so far, from the Department of Homeland Security, the military, the Border Patrol, FBI, to all of these high crime cities, are all in Democratic-run states and cities. And in fact, folks that are reading this and listening, the highest crime cities are in Republican states, Republican cities. Go look it up if you don't believe me. and no troops, no FBI, no federal agents are scheduled to be sent for the high crime cities that are controlled by Republicans. Duh. I wonder why that is. Look, this is bullshit. Portland, Oregon, where he's just sent some federal troops again. The MAGA, the Republican Party, their own website, posted videos of riots there, of people being shot in the streets and buildings being burned down. The only problem was, Jonathan, this was from riots in South America 5 years ago. Okay, it wasn't even in this country. And yet they have the balls to say that it was Portland, Oregon. And when they were called on that by a reporter, they just said, oh, well, you know, we are just journalists and we have a right to say whatever we want. Yeah, but the people who read this, the MAGA supporters, believe that this is true, and retractions don't enter into their brains. All they see is the riots and the shootings in Portland, Oregon, even though it was total bullshit.
Let's turn back, because you've just had this conversation with Ben Hodges. He's become increasingly, I would say, outspoken. He's even, on many occasions, including on my podcast, expressed his disappointment that more people at the 3 and 4 star level who are retired from the US military aren't speaking out on this issue. But what would have been the impression? Last week, you had Hegseth berating this room full of, I would say, highly experienced and generally highly decorated people who will, in their military careers, have jumped through all sorts of hoops to get that authority and accreditation to be in that room. Some of them will have 10, 20, 30 years of experience in the high command, making highly strategic decisions, complex logistical choices to be there in that room. And he berated them about fitness, about this, about that. Would they all have known his own service record? Will they all have known who Hegseth is and exactly the things he hasn't done and the false authority that he kind of claims to berate them there? Will these people bow down and take illegal orders from Trump and his cronies? Because it seems to me they can hardly have any respect for this former alcoholic, or possibly not former, co-host of a Fox News TV show.
I just had that exact conversation with General Hodges just a few minutes ago, about an hour ago, and I asked him the same thing. And yes, as you said, he's very dismayed that at least the retired flag officers, the admirals and generals, haven't spoken up pretty much at all against what happened in Quantico a week or so ago, or against the threat of enacting the Insurrection Act. I'll go one step further, and I said this to Ben. I understand the problems that would happen if anybody in that room, the admirals or generals or even the senior non-commissioned officers, were to walk out after hearing what they heard. I understand that their career would be over. But you know what? Again, we are at the inflection point where we are about to lose our constitutional republic. The military is the last line, the very last line of defense to protect what we have. If they give in to him, even if that means just being stoic and yes, sir, and obeying his orders and not saying anything, that's not enough. I wish that even one of those generals or admirals would have gotten up, not said anything, and walked out. That would have said more than anything any of them could ever have said. What would have been better is after that one individual started that movement, more of them walked out, and it just became a flood. That would have been incredible, and it would have just energized the opposition to this dictatorship. It didn't happen, unfortunately. I hope that more of them now will speak out. I'm talking active duty, and I agree with Ben. But you know what? It's easy when you're retired and you got your pension and you don't have to worry about it to speak out. Damn it, no. It's time that the active duty speak out, because they're the ones that are going to have to take these illegal orders, these unconstitutional orders very soon, and order their troops perhaps to turn their guns on the American people. They're going to have to take a stand, and soon.
And that's an interesting one. I mean, Trump does have leverage. It's not just their active wage, as you say, it's their pensions. Many of them will be relying on those pensions when they leave active duty and go into business or whatever, or consulting. They're still going to be reliant on that service record. And you know that Trump is a very thin-skinned, very vengeful man. Without doubt, he would dismiss anybody who walked out, and without doubt, he would try to strip them of whatever financial rights they have from their service. But as you say, silence in some ways is complicity, and there we have a lot of the CEOs of America as well, bending the knee.
Same thing. Except, Jonathan, I'm sorry to jump
in. They're not just silent. Some of them are quite actively
they're
complicit.
Giving billions to him and saying, well, do whatever you want. Look, all I'm saying about the generals and admirals, that's their job, is to be in harm's way. They took an oath to protect the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And damn it, Trump and MAGA are domestic enemies of the United States. And the people that don't like it, that are watching this, go to hell. They are enemies of the United States. When he calls Democrats the enemy within, Satan, and terrorists, you're okay with that, aren't you? Well, that's because you are what you are. I'm sorry. He is the master of projection, meaning his psychosis is thrust on other people. He projects what he is on other people. He is a domestic terrorist. He's also demented. And you know, the fact that people like him, love him, and are following this sick individual, this convicted felon, speaks very badly of this country. And people that are calling me a lunatic or pathetic or a Nazi, that's the problem in this country. We have a country 50% made up of imbeciles. I'm sorry, I'll say it forever. We have a very uneducated country. They don't read, they don't know anything about history, and they love gratuitous violence. Apparently, they love someone like Donald Trump saying to thump him, to shoot people. What are they going to say when the troops do turn their guns on the American people in the near future? I'm sorry to say. Are they going to rationalize that too, even though I'm saying that's what's going to happen? You know what the answer is, Jonathan? Yes, they will. They'll say that those were terrorists. The soldiers had no choice but to mow them down. And I can't say that's just disgusting. That's the point we're at in America right now.
And I think this is a crucial point of unawareness of history. You know, when something like the Bolshevik Revolution happened, it was relatively new. And that's not an excuse for those that were complicit in it. And indeed, the revolutionaries were the first ones up against the wall, as they often are in these, but especially brutal in the Bolshevik Revolution, because once you've kicked the door in, you don't have the use of contrarian figures. In fact, they become an irritant to your regime. Ironically, I can see, and not everyone's going to agree with this, I can see that Tucker Carlson might become an irritant to the Trump regime at some point, and he himself might disappear after helping to kick the door down and establish this. It would be the same with Murdoch, although he's getting on for 100. He probably won't be around to see the fruits of his labors. But it's this lack of awareness of history. And when you look at people like Timothy Snyder, there are many who pointed that at him and several other, let's say, professors of periods of fascism and bloodletting in history. They said, look, it's premature. You're leaving the country. You're going to take a tenure in Canada. You know, what are you doing? We're not at that point. This isn't who we are. But I think it's interesting that those that follow history are seeing some kind of, you know, history doesn't, you know, exactly follow the same pattern. It doesn't follow on rails, but there are kind of echoes. And there are a lot of patterns of 1930s in Russia and Germany, I think, starting to surface, and indeed 1990s Russia as well, and early 2000s as Putin started to hollow out his system. I did an episode a couple of months ago. I've been planning it for a while, but then you had Kimmel and Colbert, and I basically said, you know, the first people to go, after they got rid of, you know, those who have no power and the brown people and whatever, the first people to really be targeted from those that could be classed as their own, let's say, class and ethnicity and education and wealth background are going to be the satirists. And there it is. Colbert, Kimmel, the others. It's almost as if they are playing this historical playbook note by note by note.
Yeah, and the reason that it's happening so fast here, and with the acquiescence, meaning the permission of 50%, 50% of the American public, is because of what you just said. Americans have absolutely no concept of history. We never did. That was never our strong suit. But it's worse now than ever because Donald Trump and the Republican Party are playing down education. He said during the 2017 when his first year in office, that I love the poorly educated. Quote, I'm not making that up. Why would you love the poorly educated? Easy. They're a dictator's best friend. He could pull the wool over their eyes, say and do whatever he wants, and convince them that it's in their best interest. How could people who support Trump think it was good to take Kimmel off the air just because he told a joke, a not really funny joke, and not really criticizing Charlie Kirk at all? But it's okay for the president to demand he gets taken off the air. It's okay for a president to demand that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, look into and possibly revoke licenses of TV stations that criticize the president. It's okay that the house of a judge who just issued a ruling against Donald Trump was blown up, was burned to the ground recently, a few days ago, and her husband and son almost killed. And this isn't the first one. That's okay, isn't it? Because Democrats are evil. They're Satan. They're domestic terrorists, and we have to eliminate them. It makes me sick. It really does. And they won't come, meaning the MAGA supporters won't come out and say, you're right. That's wrong. I don't like the Republicans. I like MAGA and I support Trump, but that's wrong, David. Nope, they won't say that. Whatever Trump wants to do is okay with them, including murder. Makes me sick.
Well, that is, deeply shocking because, again, one of these parallels with 1930s Germany is that if you're going to coerce a system, you have to go after the legal system, and it's in your playbook to do that as quickly and as soon as possible. Now, obviously, with the American system where senior judges are essentially political appointees, not the case in our judicial system. I'm not saying that necessarily leads to a better outcome, but you cannot stack the legal system with people that have a particular slant, or who you hope have a particular slant, or who owe you things, or who owe things to particular political parties. But it seems there's a certain amount of serendipity there that really, that stacking or layering of the legal system, they've been working on that for a couple of decades, and the cards, could have gone another way, but unfortunately they seem to go in Trump's favor.
Well, real quickly, I just want to throw out something I just saw, because it changes every hour of every day. Pam Bondi, our Attorney General of the United States, was just grilled, meaning interviewed before Congress, Senate yesterday, and was asked specifically about an incident where Trump's czar, his boss in charge of the border and deportations, Tom Homan, was caught red-handed by a FBI undercover sting operation, accepting $50,000 in cash in a bribe in, of all things, a brown paper bag. It was videotaped. It was audio taped. It's all there. And when asked about that yesterday or the day before, Attorney General asked what's happening with the case and where's the money, she refused to answer, except to say that we investigated this and there's no reason to believe any crime was committed. And yet Trump supporters, that's a good thing, isn't it? You've got a senior official accepting 50 large in bribes on tape in a brown paper bag, and the Department of Justice just disappears the case. But you're okay with that, aren't you? And I'm just a raving lunatic. Okay.
We're not quite at that point, but we have I would say, a media problem. So it's just been announced this week that one of Nigel Farage's most senior deputies, who he now claims he barely knows and had nothing to do with, this man was the only person in all three of Farage's vehicles, parties that he created. So he's known him and clearly worked alongside with him for a couple of decades. And there are many, many photos of them together as well. This guy has just been convicted. He hasn't been sentenced yet, but he's been convicted of taking Russian bribes to ask questions in the European Parliament, to basically inject Russian narratives into European democracy. That was before we left the European Union. And yet there's only a small handful of outlets, news outlets, that are actually covering this. So again, we have this process of normalization or creeping normalization, making Farage inevitable when he is far from inevitable. I mean, it really isn't inevitable. He's got 4 MPs in the House. He is potentially, the rumors go, neck deep in potential financial scandals. And one of his key deputies has just been convicted and likely will go to jail for it. For actually, let's call it what it is, colluding with the enemy to distort our democracies. That, in my book, and someone in the Conservative Party called it out for what it is. He said this man is a traitor, and that is a treacherous act to our country and our way of governance and values. And yet the mainstream media are simply, it's tumbleweed. That's one of the challenges in the US, isn't it? Because there's a huge amount of abeyance in advance from the mainstream media. And indeed, you hinted at these court cases where they are signaling that they're obeying in advance by preemptively paying out huge amounts of money to Trump for spurious lawsuits. And it's an incredible mechanism that he's created here of basically taking bribes through the legal system.
Sure. I mean, even before he was elected for this second term, the mainstream media in America was an abject failure. They are so obsessed with this both sides-ism, meaning they feel a fetish that they have to supply both sides with equal amount of information. They can't make one look wrong, one look right. They can't call people out if they're absolutely lying. They have to make them both look equal. They can't seem like they're taking sides. And God forbid the media can't come out as saying they actually support American values. Can't do that. It doesn't matter. If somebody literally is a traitor, including with Russia, or telling outright lies that are injurious to our national security, you can't really say that. Yeah, you can hint and maybe print some facts, but you can't come out. Then if you do, you're going to have to say something similar about the other side. Since Trump's been elected again this term, of course, it's gotten worse. ABC settled that insane lawsuit, which everyone said he would have lost for suing ABC for defamation for $1 billion or something. They gave him $15 million and said, please don't sue us. Leave us alone. The same thing happened with Paramount because they wanted to merge with another network, another film studio. In CBS now, they fired their head of news and replaced him with a Trump apparatchik. I forget her name. It doesn't matter. So we will never see any criticism on what used to be America's foremost, I don't know if you want to call it best news network, but CBS is the home of 60 Minutes. So it was widely respected. No more. They're going to bow down to whatever Trump wants. And it goes on and on and on with all of the media and motion picture companies. We don't have a free media anymore in the United States. They are holding the licenses and funding over all of our media. And for people who say, again, well, that's not a dictatorship. Really? Dictators don't control the media? That's not one of their main objectives? Go read something. Not a book. You don't read books. Go on the internet and look it up if you're that dumb, because that's exactly what dictators do. The media, the judiciary, the security services, and the military. The last one that Trump doesn't have yet is the military, and he's very close to getting it.
And of course, there's a great way to co-opt the military. I mean, Germany had a lot of internal, let's say, opposition. And especially within the military, you had sort of traditions, Prussian traditions in the military that were not particularly Nazi, and they didn't particularly like the tone and the style and so on. How did Hitler solve it? Well, by declaring wars. And actually, the first few, he won them quite convincingly. That kept those internal critics within the military quiet. Is that what, in the time we got left, is that what is next in the Trump playbook? An invasion of a country, a short, victorious, brutal, unpleasant invasion, but designed to keep the military kind of distracted and on side. And of course, it creates great content to keep his, client networks, propaganda networks stocked with, fire hose of nonsense day in, day out.
It's already started. I mean, look at the boats, the alleged narco boats that he's sunk in the Caribbean. I'm not saying these were not drug dealers. I'm not saying that because we don't know. There's been absolutely no evidence provided at all about who they are, what they were carrying, if anything, where they were going, or anything. All we see is videotapes of these rather small boats getting blown out of the water by the U.S. Navy. We know that there is a task force sitting off the northern coast of South America right now with a couple of thousand Marines, an aircraft carrier, I think a destroyer or two, a flotilla that can launch, and special forces that can launch some kind of an operation, a mission against either Venezuela, Argentina, whoever the enemy is of the day. They want Maduro for sure. And so is that going to be the first war that Trump starts? I don't know, but think about it, Jonathan. The admirals, the officers and men who conducted those raids in the Caribbean are already guilty. That's murder. They don't have any domestic law or international law that allows them to just pick out a boat without any proof, any evidence, any probable cause, and blow it out of the water and kill everybody on board. That's called crime. And they've all been guilty of that. So already those people are in violation of the Constitution in domestic and international law. Does that mean it's going to continue and get worse? He's going to pick another conflict to make him and the military, like you said, feel good about doing something under their leader, Trump. Boy, that's probably not too far off. Once he owns the military, and it only takes one flag officer, one senior officer, admiral, general, to follow illegal, unconstitutional orders to be his, to own him, to own these officers and his command. And I'm really, really nauseous to say that I think we're very close to something like that happening.
And this is the other part of Putin's playbook, is to ultimately make everyone complicit, ensure that everyone feeds from the trough, and that you can deny them food at any point. You can deny them a place, whether it's status, power, income. You can take their property at any point. So there is no longer any freedom of economic existence. And then you give out the sort of power, prestige, and status to those who show loyalty or compliance. And those that don't fit into the system are initially ostracized. If they carry on resisting, you try to force them out of the country. If that doesn't work, you ultimately kill them, like Navalny. That's the slide. And that, unfortunately, I think is the process that we're going to be tracking through the course of these episodes. We're kind of out of time on this one, but we are going to meet every week to chart the course of this descent into authoritarian slide. But we're not just going to bemoan it as well. We're also going to be talking about solutions to this, because we have to remember that Ukraine came from that Soviet sphere. Ukraine has spent several centuries where Russia has attempted to dismember any sense of identity, civic society, and it has been building up a democratic resilience brick by brick by brick. I think we need to learn from the history you referenced earlier, because it's not impossible to turn the tide, but it will take will, it'll take a high degree of awareness of how other societies have emerged from dictatorship, and this is what we're going to be discussing.
And folks, I am passionate, as you've seen. I'm passionate for my country, for democracy, and I've actually said in other podcasts and articles, I consider Ukraine to be the new beacon of democracy. I couldn't be prouder of what they're doing. Just unbelievable. And I hope we don't lose ours. The West needs to look to Ukraine right now. I'm going to say that flat out. And yeah, I'm passionate. You can consider me to be a lunatic. I'm a proud lunatic for democracy and a proud lunatic against somebody like Trump and Putin and any dictator. And I'm proud of it.
Well, I'm glad that we can at least do this, and it helps at least to us to feel like we're not necessarily going insane and only the only ones having these thoughts going around our heads. And hopefully we can attract other people there, and even people
Jonathan, please,
who.
I'd like you to tell your folks before we go, because this is the first one. We are going to have guests. We're going to have people that will offer solutions, not just us droning on, but people, very important people, internationally known folks that will add to the conversation and will offer solutions to some of the things we've been talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So watch this space. I think this is going to be a thrilling format, and hopefully it will do some good as well, and it will inspire people to unite, trust each other, and push back against what is happening. For today, though, we're going to end the stream there. David, thank you so much. Stay on the line, and I'm just going to end the stream. Thank you to everyone for all your comments. And, I know I put someone in timeout, but that's because comments ended up being quite abusive. We do welcome challenging comments. We welcome people who don't share the same point of view. If we're going to win this, we're going to have to unite with people who we don't necessarily agree eye to eye, but we need to find commonality with. And I think that's the key thing that enabled Ukraine to emerge from the Russian yoke. And we have to learn to do the same. For today, though, thank you.